Here we go. Today is Sunday, September 15th, 2024, and this is episode 279 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat.
Good evening, Jerry. Happy Sunday to you.
Happy Sunday. And just a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. Or
past, present, or future.
For those of us who have employers, that is. Not that I'm bitter or anything.
I envy your lack of a job. I don't envy your lack of a paycheck. So that is the conflict.
Very interesting times right now for me.
Indeed.
All right. So our first story today comes from Bleeping Computer, and the title here is TfL, which is Transportation for London, requires in-person password resets for 30,000 employees after a hack. So those of you who may not be aware, Transportation for London had suffered what I guess has been described as a nebulous security incident. They haven't really pushed out a lot of information about what happened. They have said that it does not affect customers, but it apparently does impact some back office systems that did take off certain parts of their services offline. Like I think they couldn't issue refunds, and there were a few other transportation related things that were broken as a result. But I think in the aftermath, they're trying to make sure that they've evicted the bad guy, who, by the way, apparently has been arrested. So
that's rare. Somebody actually got arrested.
Yeah. And not only that, but apparently it was somebody local.
Oops.
In the country, which may or may not be associated with a known named threat actor, by the way, that was involved in some other ransomware attacks.
Kids, don't hack in your own backyard.
That's right. Make sure you don't have extradition treaties with where you're attacking. So what I thought was most interesting was the approach here to getting back up and going. They had disabled, so TfL had disabled the access for all of their employees, and they're requiring their employees to show up at a designated site to prove their identity in order to regain access. This isn't the first organization that's done this, but it is something that I suspect a lot of organizations don't think about the logistics of in the aftermath of a big hack. And if you're a large company spread out all over the place, the logistics of that could be pretty daunting.
Yeah, it's wild to me that they want in-person verification of 30,000 employees. But given the nature of their company and business, I'm guessing they're all very centrally located and used to going to physical offices. But man, can you imagine if you're a remote employee and you don't have any office anywhere near you? How would you handle that? I'm probably not going to get on a plane to go get my password re-enabled.
Exactly.
You know what it did remind me of, though, is remember back in the day, PGP and PGP key signing?
Oh, the key parties. Yes.
Yes. Where you basically, it's a web of trust, and people you trust could verify and sign another key, like at a key signing party, because we were fun back then. That's what nerds used to do. And then that's how you had the circle of trust. So maybe they could do something similar where a verified employee could verify another employee. Then you've got the whole insider threat issue, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it just reminded
Nobody
me
trusts Bob's. Nobody trusts Bob's. Yeah.
That's true. Your friend, Bob, how many times has he been in prison? Most recently, like where? Rwanda, I think I heard.
Yeah. He's got that frequent visitor card.
But yet has some of the best stories.
He does. He definitely does. So apparently they make reference to a similar incident that happened at Dick's Sporting Goods. I will emphasize the sporting goods part. They had a similar issue, and that is a nationwide retailer here in the U.S. At least I don't know if they're outside of the U.S. And so that really wouldn't be possible with transportation for London. I assume that most of the people associated with it are local or within a reasonable driving distance or commuting distance, as the case may be. But in the situation with a retailer, a nationwide retailer, I think they had to go with virtual in person. So they basically had Zoom meetings with employees, and I assume had them show like pictures of their government ID and so on. So the logistics of that is interesting, and it isn't really something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. But I know in the aftermath of a big attack like this, establishing trust and certainty in who has access to your network would be super important. So I think it's worth putting it into your game plan.
Yeah, it is a wild one. And what do you trust, especially in the age of deep fakes and easily convincing AI copies of other employees? And I don't know. It's an interesting one.
All right.
So
Our next, yeah, it was certainly an unfolding story, which I don't think is over yet, based on everything I'm reading.
I did see one quote in here that made me chuckle, which is this is a quote from the transport agency added on their employee. Some customers may ask questions about the security of our network and their data. First and foremost, we must reassure that our network is safe. Okay, define safe, but that's just us being
Safe,
safe-ish,
safe-ish,
right?
safe now.
Safe,
Uh,
safe. It resembles something that is sometimes called appropriately safe. Based on the criteria that we came up with, it's completely safe.
which I'm sure is true because they had also had a CLOP ransomware infection, I guess, a couple months prior to this.
Wow.
So
I mean, what do you use for clop? Is that like a cream? Is that like a how is that
I
treated typically?
so every time I hear CLOP, I it takes me back to the Monty Python, the coconut horse strutting. That's what I think about when I hear the word clap,
That's
which
fair.
is which is oddly appropriate given that this is in the UK, which is where Monty Python hails from.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say where they have coconuts.
Only if they're transported by swallows.
You youngins will just have to go Google it.
Got to go watch that movie. All right, it's worth it. By the way, I remember making my son, both my sons watch it, and they protested. And now I think they've each seen it like 30 or 40 times.
So when you say process, did you like have to duct tape them to a chair and like pry their eyes open and
I
do a
did.
whole
I
yeah
think they
train
thought it
spotting
was.
situation?
I think they thought it was like an actual movie about the Holy Grail.
Which why would they be opposed to that? That could also
I,
be interesting. Indiana Jones did a fine movie on it.
it's true, but it that does not hold a candle to the Monty Python Holy Grail movie. Let's just be honest.
We learned a lot. We learned about facing the peril.
Yeah.
We learned that Camelot is a silly place. And we learned how to end a movie when you don't have a better plan. Again, way off topic, but you youngins will just have to go.
Oh, okay. So back on topic, our next story comes from Security Week, and the title here is Google introduces air-gapped backup vault to thwart ransomware. And I'm going to put quotes as they do over air-gapped because as they describe it, it is logically air-gapped, not actually air-gapped. So and by the way, I don't necessarily mean to take away from the utility of the solution that they're offering here. But calling it air gapped, I think, is maybe a little bit of a misnomer. So they are offering Google, they being Google, are offering a service where you, as a Google Cloud customer, can store your backups to a storage service that does not appear as part of your cloud account. It's part of a Google managed project that is transparent to your account. So if somebody were to take over your account, for example, or to compromise systems within your account, they actually wouldn't be able to do anything with that backup, which I think it's a pretty smart. The one thing that I was wondering, obviously, that you are not necessarily protected in the case that Google's cloud itself becomes the victim of something bad, but that is a kind of a theoretical issue at this point. But the one that concerns me a bit is what happens, as we have seen in some other instances. There was um, I'm forgetting the name at the moment. There was a company whose AWS account at the time was basically deleted, and they had all of their data, all of their backups in their cloud account, and they had it split across different availability zones. And it didn't matter because the actor actually deleted everything in their account, and I believe they actually deleted the account itself. And I do wonder the same thing, if your account were to be taken over, would that backup persist? Would you have the ability after the fact to prove to Google who you were and be able to resurrect that? I
Do you mean the one that happened accidentally that Google did with that Australian pension fund, or like a bad actor getting it and deleting it?
Bad actor that got
Gotcha.
inside it.
Yep.
Yeah. It was a GitHub competitor, as I recall. I
Yes.
just can't remember the name. It was
I will look at.
several years ago. I do think, and I've said this, I say this an increasing amount. I do think we are on the cusp of much more aggressive, what I'll call cloud native attacks, where adversaries are actually attacking not just the workloads in the cloud, but actually the cloud resources themselves, the cloud accounts and whatnot. So I think as time goes on, things like this are going to become much more important, and questions like what I just asked, I think, are going to become increasingly important too.
Yeah, it's interesting that it makes sense, first of all, to make sure that if I've got a bad actor or ransom or whatever that's out there deleting things, I don't want it to just delete my backups, which is something we've always talked about. Is that could be a weakness in your automated systems. If they've got full admin rights into your cloud environment, what stops them from going after your backups? So that makes sense. It is interesting how strong that quote unquote logical air gapping is. Makes me wonder a little. Somebody should probably test it, but I was surprised this wasn't offered before, honestly. But it also makes me think, remember the days when we used to back up the tape and send those tapes offsite to underground storage facilities? And
And half the time, the tapes would fall off the truck,
right.
spill it out onto the freeway, I guess.
And you never test restoring them. And then when you do need to restore them, it's going to take 43 months and half them are bad.
You
It
would
was a weird time.
recall the tapes, and the tapes would come back in a locked box, and there'll be tapes missing. It was just like the grand old days. I don't know why we don't still do that.
Uh, I won't go on the we're old rant, but boy, makes me feel old. But this makes sense. Like what I'm also curious about, I haven't looked into this, is how many versions of backups do you have? Because the other thing I think about is you've got ransomware and it automatically backs up how many iterations or am I just backing up encrypted data I can't restore because it's encrypted? The backup system doesn't know the difference. It's just backing up an iterative change. So that's
True.
something else to think about is, okay, how many snapshots back can I go? Because that starts to get expensive. But if I'm just like automatically backing up my encrypted data, oops. But it's interesting. And I like the concept. And it's meant to fight one particular source of pain, which is ransomware deleting your backups. But
Yeah, I really like the concept too. I think
yeah.
things like this are going to become increasingly important as
Mhm.
time goes on. Happy to see things like this starting to emerge.
Indeed.
But now, again, it comes back to making sure that it is actually working.
Yeah.
Not
And testing like a restore and
right.
do the assumptions you have work. And
Exactly.
that's one thing, not to go off on a bit of a side rant, that I see a lot is organizations don't have enough time built into their IT or security schedules to actually test these things. They just, oh, we think it's going to work. And the first time they test it is during a crisis, which is a terrible idea. You
Right.
want to be able to test like when you're not in crisis mode and see how well this stuff works. So,
Absolutely. Our next story comes from Ars Technica, and the title is Rogue Whois Server Gives Researchers Superpowers No One Should Ever Have.
This one's crazy.
Yeah. So there's a company called Watchtower. Of course, as all things tech now, it isn't spelled correctly. But I won't hold that against them. Uh, One of their researchers found during their stay at Black Hat that the .mobi top level domain had recently changed the location of its Whois server. So previously, it was a domain hosted on a .NET top level domain, but apparently over some time in the recent past, they moved that to, unsurprisingly, a name hosted on the .mobi TLD, and I guess through probably some bit of corporate cost savings or missteps, don't know, they let that domain, they let the .net version of that domain expire, which is problematic. And so this person realized that, registered the domain, and then actually started seeing legitimate requests, Whois requests coming in. And then they set up a Whois server and found that they would have had the opportunity to do quite a few bad things, like creating TLS certificates for domains, because VeriSign and others were still pointing their Whois to the old .NET domain. So they hadn't completely switched over from the .NET domain to the .mobi domain, and as a result, chaos ensued. And it's really hard to put bounds on how bad this could be, right? There's when you they go through quite a few different situations that this could have allowed, for example, intercepting email and lots of different telemetry-based attacks. But I don't even know that we have a good handle on the art of the possible when something like this happens.
Yeah.
So
Plus
that's
the TLS certificate trust that comes
right.
natively with this, which is massive. Like that just can cascade into a whole bunch of shenanigans when you can own the authority around TLS certificates around an entire domain like that.
Right.
That's huge.
Which they were able to do in this instance. So really bad for sure. I thought it was interesting because in my former role, I I saw lots of situations similar to this. And not just in my immediately former role, but in lots of former roles. Companies often register or create internal domains. And those domains sometimes they start off as bogus. Like they start off as, I'm trying to think of a good example. Let's say like, you know, dot fun. That's a stupid one, right? When you created your Active Directory domain back in 1997, like that TLD wasn't around. But over the
Right.
years, that did become a domain and nobody thinks twice about it. And suddenly now you're susceptible to a whole class of attacks. And I think there's a broad range of problems that the industry has associated with domain names either expiring or, for example, a lot of companies, as they acquire other companies, they transition that company's email to the acquired company's domain. And over time, sometimes, not all the time, but they let those domains expire. Somebody comes along and you can pretty much guarantee that there's still almost certainly valid email going to that domain. And so I think there's this whole class of problems that we don't often, it's a super simple and dumb problem space that has emerged around domain clashes, domain problems, people letting domains expiring. So I don't feel like this is something that is well represented in different security frameworks and policies and whatnot, because it's off in the corner. But it is definitely, and has been, as this proves, it has been and can be a big source of problems. And so I think it's really important to keep your eye on this.
Yeah, I agree completely. And to the point you made earlier about ADs or internal domains being set up and then something that many years on the line becoming a new top level domain. It reminds me of when people didn't follow RFC 1918 and used random IP addresses that later are routable. I can't figure out why they're having weird routing issues talking to certain parts of the internet and not others. And it's like, there's,
That
you
almost
got to
never
watch.
happens.
And what's interesting is this, like with all respect, but a lot of folks today don't understand how the plumbing of the internet works anymore. It's been abstracted away from them. And a lot of people, this sort of problem with DNS reminds me a little bit of how fragile BGP is. And very few people really understand BGP anymore. They don't have to, they don't need to know it. That's a SaaS provider problem. That's a cloud provider problem, but it's very much a real problem. Like you and I, at one point in our career, we went through the process of registering for our own /19 and figuring out all the fun of what it took to route that and share that and all those things that came with it, which I think was valuable, not to just pat ourselves in the back. But it's interesting today when you go talk to people about some of the complexities of DNS, they have no idea. They don't,
Right.
they don't know how all this works. They don't know that this is even a susceptible problem, because I think there's this inherent belief that there's just some overriding authority managing all the top level domains and all the top level Whois servers. And there's not. Be careful.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right. The next story is this one is it's a bit of a follow-up to one we talked about last time. It comes from Cybersecurity Dive, and the title is Global Cybersecurity Workforce Growth Flatlines Stalling at 5.5 million pros. This is based off of a report released by the ISC Squared, which is for those of you who don't know, they're the people who create and maintain the CISSP and a bunch of other certification programs. What they identified is that the growth of the cybersecurity workforce grew 0.1% year to year, which is interesting. It's like from 5-ish million to 5.5 million.
Wait, that's not 0.1%. That's 10%.
I'm sorry. You're right.
Yeah.
5.45 to 5.5. There you go.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yep.
I can do math.
I'm here to help. I'm here to help.
I promise. But this was the first time that the growth has really stalled in quite a few years. What I found most interesting with this particular report and this particular article is it explained something that we continue to talk about both on the show and as an industry, about kind of the dichotomy between people's experience in trying to get a job in security and the way that the industry talks about the number of unfilled security jobs. Because those two things, as we talked about last time, again, aren't in concert, right? There's a gap somewhere. And this one, for the first time, started to explain it in a way that made sense to me. And what they describe is that the workforce, like the number of people who are employed in the security sphere, went up very slowly, right? But the number of people that are needed to keep companies secure, as identified through interviews with companies, is growing dramatically and outpaces by a large margin the number of people who are qualified to work. Where it breaks down is that just because I say that I need 50 more people on my team to keep our company secure doesn't mean that I get to go hire 50 people. It just means that in order to do what I think is a responsible job, I'm making this up completely, by the way. In order to do a good job of keeping my company secure, I would need 50 more people than I have. And so
Right.
that then gets counted in the total number of these quote unfilled security roles, but it
Really,
doesn't actually exist.
that's just the beginning point of negotiation for your budget.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So,
Yes.
so when they refer to workforce, do they mean the number of people employed in the
Yes.
cybersecurity industry or the number of people available to fill jobs in the industry?
They're talking about the number of people, butts and seats, basically.
Okay. So there could be, if they're saying there's 5.5 million people in the cybersecurity workforce industry collecting a paycheck, but there's 10 million qualified people seeking jobs. That's one of your gaps, right? There's just not the jobs out there for the number of qualified people, which if that's true, which we've heard the opposite, there's a skills gap and there's a capability gap, which could go back to some companies maybe asking for the wrong things, like 10 years of experience in a technology that's been around for 2 years, which we've seen over and over again. Or if there's too many people chasing too few jobs, it can drive down salaries. So I don't know. It's interesting. If people are willing to accept jobs for less, basically in competition with somebody else, that can also depress wages or at least cap growth. So I don't know. We keep hearing to your point, very conflicting things about the market and the industry, including, hey, we don't make it easy for new people or entry level roles or mentoring or journeyman roles or ways to bring people in that we can build up. People only want to hire experienced people. Where do they start getting experience? So I think some of that comes to play too.
I think it's all intertwined, right? In the article, they point out that there are 5.5 million butts and seats in the security sphere. They believe, based on their data, that there's a need for 10.2 million people. Right, so that creates a big gap. But again, that doesn't mean that there's 4.7 million unfilled jobs.
Yeah, I certainly don't see those job listings.
It means that at a top level, it means that we think in order to do a responsible job of protecting every company, we would have to have 4.7 million more people working in security than are available today. Now, but where it, I think, folds back into what you were saying about wages is that for a long time, security people have had it great. And I say that as one of them. We were pretty highly compensated. And so it's a difficult thing, especially as of late, it's a difficult thing to continue adding more and more people to your payroll at the salaries that people are getting. And so there is part of me, as we talked about last time, the US government is launching an initiative to train up hundreds of thousands of more people to enter the workforce. The reality is those people are going to be competing with people who are already unable to find jobs.
Right.
But the net effect, I think, of that is going to be deflationary on cybersecurity job salaries.
Possible.
And then in doing so, theoretically, companies will be able to hire more of them.
Yeah, I think the danger is always, is that training going to align with what companies need?
I don't think so, because I think we have created this, and I know that we've gone way off into the HR security podcast, but and look, I managed a very large team inside of a very large company that had large, I had an interesting vantage point. What I observed is that companies have adopted this position of what I refer to as just-in-time talent. Like
Sure.
we create this like profile of expectations of what people need to have in order to come on board. For an entry level role, like you've got to have 10 years of experience and you've got to know all these very specific security tools for an entry level role. And how do you get an entry level role if you don't have you end up into this kind of catch 22. But on the other side, one of the concerns I've got is that as an industry, for a long time, security people came out of IT,
Yep.
right? You came out of application development or system administration or network engineering or help desk. And a lot of these people had a very broad and deep background in maybe not every aspect of IT, but in lots of aspects of IT. And now security's become a field unto its own. And so you go through school and you graduate with a degree in security. And it's all been about security and not necessarily about the implementation of IT, the implementation of and operation of IT inside companies.
Right.
And I think that not I'm not by the way, I'm not in any way downplaying the importance of the stuff that you learn in school. What I'm saying is I think you come out lacking some of the important context that you need in order to be effective. The other side is that a lot of that context tends to be pretty specific to a company. And I think that where we're at is that companies have largely lost the patience for whatever reason to train people, to do
Yeah.
on the job training and grow people. And and that scares me to be not only from like the human aspect, but also from like the ability to be effective and whatnot. Because now I think we're inhibiting, artificially governing the effectiveness of people because we got people who have relatively narrow sets of skills coming into the workforce. And I suppose in some instances that's okay. But I think it is I don't know, maybe I'm just getting old.
No, I agree with your point. And again, I'm also getting old, but I find there are very few generalists anymore. Everybody's very hyper specialized.
Mhm.
And I think that's a bit of a shame. Yeah, you could be super good at one particular thing, and that's very valuable. And there's value to that. But I also find a lot of value in IT generalists who come into security just have such a breadth of understanding of how these things are supposed to work together and what's normal that I think it brings a lot of value to the job. And
Yes.
it goes back to what we were saying earlier. People don't understand DNS. They don't understand BGP. They don't understand IP routing because they don't have to. And I guess that's okay. I guess maybe the world has gotten so complex that this is the way it needs to be. But I do think it's a real shame becoming like IBM, massive company. Those are the types of companies that I think should be able to grow their own talent with mentorship and the whole concept of the way we used to do things with apprenticeship and raising people up and giving them an opportunity to grow and build that skill set. And maybe their salary is a little low initially, but as they grow and hopefully that skill set will grow and the salary will grow, or sadly, they probably will just bounce to another company. That's, I think, what companies worry about is
Exactly.
you train them and they leave. What if you don't train them and they stay? That's the way I could counter that. But it is a problem. I don't know that I have a solution, but I'm a big fan of trying to promote people who are interested from IT into security. Not that one is better than the other, but I do think those folks with IT backgrounds have a lot of basic understanding that I think really helps with general security engineering and SOC. I mean, the other thing I'd say is it takes a long time to ramp up. I don't know that companies respect that anymore. It may take 6 months to a year to really be effective in at least a security operations role
Right.
and understand what normal is for a company. And it feels like everybody's moving too fast for that now. So I guess this is the whole get off my lawn speech, but um, it's an
I,
interesting problem.
I from an individual standpoint, I think it's clearly a much more competitive market than it used to be. And I think it's becoming increasingly important for people who are serious about getting into it and finding a job to be able to differentiate yourself. And I know that's heretical to say in some circles. If you want the job, I'm not saying that you have to work 200 hours a week, but you've got to be able to separate yourself from the pack. Otherwise, I don't know what to say. You'll be looking for work for a long time.
Just don't start a defensive security competitive podcast. We don't need the competition.
No,
Please.
no, we definitely don't. By the way, for those of you who know, I recently lost my job, and it's okay. It's not complaining. It's actually been an amazing experience. And I've been working with a career coach who's awesome, by the way. If you have the opportunity to work with a career coach, like that's probably one of the best things because they can call bullshit on your, like, they hold you to account. But one of the things that mine told me was, you know, this is a difficult economy right now to find a job. It takes a long time to find and a lot of false starts and a lot of tries to find a job right now. And I don't know if it's like historical at a historical low. I don't know, but it's definitely I've got kids that have recently graduated from college, and I look at the struggles they are having with finding jobs as recent college graduates. And it's just a difficult economy. And I don't see that getting better anytime soon. Maybe when and if interest rates go back to negative, then we'll start seeing lots of startups again. But I don't know.
I do think certainly this is a well trodden road that other people do a better job talking about than I do. But I think that there are certain roles that we have treated poorly culturally, like blue collar jobs and trade jobs that have a huge, massive shortage of workers who are desperate for
Hmm.
workers. But we have, and those are good paying jobs with great benefits. We went down this path of everybody needs to go to college and everybody needs a white collar job. And I think that's not great for people or our society. And the other thing I'd be curious about, which you're seeing both sides of it. You're at a very senior point in your career. And my first thought would be, is it tougher to find a senior level job? Because there's less of those in theory. But you're also saying that your kids right out of college are basically looking for their first main major career job, which is the opposite end of that spectrum. And they're struggling. I did tell you underwater basket weaving would be a tough role for them to find a career in, but they insisted.
You you warned them. That's fair. I, I I think it's all up and down the scale. So certainly for me, if and when I do another thing, it'll probably be another more senior level executive type role. I don't know if it'll be a CISO again. That was hard, and I don't know if I got that in me again. It was fun for sure. When I talk to my kids and other young people, one of the bits of feedback I get is there's been a lot of people who have lost their jobs. And I think this is also true, maybe particularly in the IT space. Lots of layoffs in the IT world over the past 18 months. And those people have experience and they're unable to find jobs necessarily at the same level that they were. And so they may be competing. I guess what I'm trying to say is entry level people who are coming out of college may very well be competing against people who are not entry level for entry level jobs because those other people can't find other jobs. And so they're trying to find any kind of work. And so people entering the workforce are not competing against other people entering the workforce. They're competing with other
Yeah.
people who may have experience who have recently lost their job. And I think it is what it is, but it's a challenge. So
Yeah.
anyway,
It, one last thing I'll say on this is that in theory, the unemployment rate is low. So are we just going through a cyclical change where those jobs are moving to other areas and IT and I don't know. I see this is the challenge. It's all this conflicting data. Uh, we have all these unfulfilled jobs, but then people can't get hired. I don't know. I don't know what to say. Just I'm thankful I have a job and I will do my best not to be so frustrated tomorrow, Monday morning, as I'd all be.
I'm thankful to be in the spot I'm in, even though I don't have a job. So
You do have a job. Your job is to entertain me on this podcast and our 12 listeners.
hopefully I'm doing okay.
You're meeting expectations.
Good, good. All right. Our last story also comes from Cybersecurity Dive, and the title here is Moveit victims are still coming forward. This time it's Wisconsin Medicare. There isn't anything necessarily new here. We obviously were on hiatus when the big Moveit breach happened in the second quarter of 2023. But we are now 18 months on about, and we're still hearing about net new victims of this. And I find it just mind boggling. Now, this particular entity reported to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid that they were breached back in July, but presumably the actual breach happened much earlier than that, only recently detected. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if
I
somebody woke
certainly
up one
hope that
day.
I certainly hope that like they hadn't gone unpatched all this long and just suddenly got popped.
I doubt that, but it's possible, right? But the thing that I've been concerned about it, and again, this is an asset management problem. Like, I don't know how many of these things were out there that companies didn't realize. It
Yeah,
was like being managed by a
right.
subcontractor to a subcontractor, and hey, the magic just happens. I pay the bill and the files just appear. I don't know how it happened.
Yeah, I look at this like understanding your attack surface. Like to me, you really need to understand everything that's associated with your company that's open to the internet. I know that's not the only way to attack things. I know that things start at endpoints with phishing attacks. But nonetheless, for these sorts of widespread, vulnerable, remote code exploit sort of things, you have to know what's open to the internet that are associated with.
Yes.
I just feel like that's table stakes. You got to know your attack surface. A lot of companies don't. Like it's it's a tough problem. But two, it's not something that a lot of companies spend time, I think, worrying about. But I think this is a great example. What if this has been sitting out there, just got ignored? Nobody's really maintaining it. Nobody's really patching it. Nobody really knows. But I think in cases like this, if you're a security organization, something like Moveit pops, it'd be nice to look at a list and say, huh, do we have Moveit? Oh, yeah, we do. We should go fix that.
And not only do you have it, but do your suppliers have it?
Send them an Excel sheet for them to fill out. You'll be fine.
And then have them send it to their suppliers, and their suppliers send it to their suppliers.
And eventually it just circles back around.
It's turtles all the way down. You know what? The other, again, because we didn't have a chance to talk about it at the time, the other issue I think that really exacerbated this Move It issue. Obviously, this was a very widely used, which blows my mind. It was much more widely used than I ever would have thought. File transfer tool that Progress Software, I think it was Progress Software, right? Anyway, whoever maintains it, sorry, Progress, if I got you wrong. You've got your own problems, so not going to feel too bad. The issue is that this tool, this application had a vulnerability that made it very trivial for adversaries to pull files off of the appliance. One of the things that came out in the aftermath of that is that people would allow files to be uploaded and then just sit there. Like they would obviously copy them off, but they wouldn't clean them out. And so
Look,
many of the organizations.
that's not part of my KPIs, man. My job is to get the file over there, not delete it later.
Right.
Look,
Yet another thing that isn't in our frameworks. I was listening to a book today and they made reference to the old George Box quote: all models are wrong, some models are useful. And I got to thinking, like, all security frameworks are wrong, some are useful. And,
what we
and
need
it's
is another framework of the useful bits.
totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the old XKCD. I forget which number that was, but again, I struggle because there isn't something that makes it obvious that, hey, that's a problem. Like, it's intuitively obvious in hindsight that you shouldn't store like forever files on the damn file transfer tool, right? Like you should be cleaning that off periodically or in real time as you're pulling data off of it. But that's not what happens. And for the most part, like how many company security policies would say that? I don't know that there's many. Is that part of ISO 27000 or PCI or like, no, it's not very clearly enumerated, but it is super important. The thing that is enumerated, you got to patch the thing. You got to know that thing exists. But I think there's also a very, did I lose you?
Yep.
Okay.
My Chrome.
There's a very real problem with data minimization. And I don't mean that in terms of, we've talked about it in the context of you shouldn't collect every stinking piece of data from your customers and squirrel it away. I'm talking more, does that data have to sit there?
Right.
Can you remove it? And especially important when you got something sitting on the edge, right? This was a device that was exposed to the internet.
Yeah. The tough part is probably 95 to 99% of the time, it's never a problem.
Right.
And cleaning up old files is probably not high value leverage work for a lot of employees, but it's like a whole data classification system. Nobody wants to do it. It's too much of a pain in the butt until the one time it bites you.
Yeah. The other thing that bothers me a little bit about this is that companies will make that trade-off, right? Like sure, I could pay Bob to sit there and delete those files, or I could pay Bob to go do something more productive. It's the people whose data is represented there who are actually tend to be the one that's harmed in this, and they don't get a vote. And that's
Yeah.
what bothers.
I mean, an easy solve may be just an auto expire, like 30 days, it's auto deleted.
Right. Which comes back to like,
You just,
what responsibility should that have been the default setting? Right.
yeah,
I don't know. I don't know. Anyway,
it was progress enough,
Was
by
it?
the way. I did confirm it was indeed
Okay.
progress.
I thought it was. Yes. They've had a long run of spectacular F-ups.
Your old man memory was accurate in this case.
Back in my day, Progress was a database.
That's
I
true.
was so surprised to hear that Progress is all this other crap, and apparently no database. Times are funny. Funny what happens over
They
30
lost
years.
it somewhere.
All right.
Anyway,
I think we peaked and we're on our way back down, and so we will end it here.
well, I hope people enjoyed our first video podcast of the Defensive Security Show.
We'll do better next time. I'm sure.
It only took 207 episodes. Yes, we will do better next time. And we had a little technical bobble there. I don't know how much it's going to show up, but hopefully we'll get it sorted out.
Yeah. Your browser won't stay running, huh? Call the neighbor kids. Come look at.
I'm just hoping I didn't lose too much of my side of the recording. That's all.
Good point.
We'll
All right.
We'll sort it out. But anyway.
Thank you for listening. You can find the show and all of our previous episodes on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can find the podcast on just about every podcast service under the sun. And if we aren't on one, let us know and we'll get that fixed. You can follow Mr. Kalat on X. I really hate that name, by the way. It's just like,
I still call it Twitter.
Twitter.
I'm old. So
go ahead. Where can they find you?
On Twitter and infosec.exchange at lerg, L-E-R-G.
All right, good deal. You can find me on infosec.exchange at Jerry. And with that, we will talk to you again real soon.
Have a great week, guys. Bye-bye.